You want a mid-travel suspension, but you want it on a budget, a low one. Let's get it. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Simone, I'm your host. I'm the owner and operator at Mercury Build, and this behind me is my new project vehicle. This is a truck to me that replaces my Range Rover. Needed a truck, so I bought this for my work actually. It needed some work done, which will be addressed later. And I got some miles on it, got about a beat up suspension. And I had experience driving it through the sand dunes down south a bit when I went for vacation. And I was extremely disappointed with the suspension. Granted, it's old and beat and clapped out, but it's how much it moved was even worse. So that got me into researching is what can we do to build this in a better off-roader, to have a better suspension setup in it, so it's going to be comfortable, it's going to perform. So I've been a little bit more or less kind of looking at a lot of different trucks, different things available to it, and I kind of fell into the loophole of loving Baja trucks, the prerunner trucks, right? These things look sweet. And yeah, we'll look into the suspension, different options, what I can do, the numbers that I found for the suspension that what this have and what I measured to know how I can upgrade. That's when things got very either expensive or heavily disappointing. And yeah, we built custom things here. I fabricate new products for you guys to buy to support me to do more stupider stuff per se, or things nobody does, or sometimes I just make products because I want them for what I want to do with it, just to do it. So here we are. This is going to be the new project. So this guy basically replacing my Range Rover because I needed a truck and bed, a lot of utility, that's what I needed. The proper start this off, we're going to have to give this a name. The Range Rover kind of gets called the Rover. So we have here, it's an all-terrain package. We're going for a little bit of a prerunner wannabe because I live in Pennsylvania and there is no dunes here. We're going to call this Terrain Runner. Let's keep it cheesy. First things first, before you get confused, based on the title, this is a GMT 900 front suspension. It is used suspension that, this suspension is used from 07 till 2018. Not the frame, but the suspension itself, the design of it. So the part numbers between the knuckles, the axles, things like that stay the same. The difference that has happened is frame was built different from different steel, different thickness, different height. And we also had an introduction of an electric steering rack in 2014 and up. But the suspension design from front to the rear, the way the leaf spring's set up, the shackles, the shocks, coilovers here in the front, all that stuff stayed the same. The cast iron to stamped steel to aluminum knuckle situation, control arms, that all stayed the same. So it is the same suspension. Next, you gotta hit a like, you gotta subscribe, you gotta put a comment down below, get the algorithm going. Now let's get into this front suspension. We need to figure out how much travel we have stock, what travel is available, what can we do to increase the travel, and what kind of options we are working with. And then what also can I provide. First order of business, these clapped out, rusted, beat, 137 mile ratios, got to go. How do we build a mid-travel suspension? So I have a kit behind me, but before we get to this whole situation I have going on, we need to address the information that we do know and information or we don't know, but mainly information that we are working with so we can make proper choices and rest of this, what's going on back here, will start making sense. So first thing, we need to find out how much of suspension travel we actually have, what kind of leverage ratio we're working with. That doesn't mean the number is going to be important because the shock stroke is different from what your wheel travel is because of where it's mounted on the control arm. Let's see what our leverage ratio is and let's see how much wheel travel is actually available to us. One important thing to note before we get to that is your wheel package will determine what you can do. So these measurements will be based off stock wheel stars measurement. Then we'll get into bigger wheels, but the base measurement we're working with will be based off that because that will clear the wheel well, that will clear all the travel, everything that's available on the vehicle as it sits fully stock. Because when you get in bigger wheels, bigger tires, different offsets, You get into rubbing noise issues, as we know. That's where you get into like 5-inch, 7-inch lift kits, all that stuff, which really, do you really need it? No. And especially if you're building a vehicle to have suspension travel, then those things are very big negative. They're going to take away with your trail performance, which is your off-road performance, your desert performance, whatever the case is. This is fully stock suspension with the sway bar disconnected for proper measurement, and I'm measuring 11 inches of travel, and we're limited by the upper ball joint. That said, it is 11 inches of total travel up and down, and everything is moving freely and spinning freely. So realistically, you can use 10 inches of that travel because you don't want to max out the ball joints. Now looking here at the front suspension, leverage ratio would determine the distance difference between our strut mounts, which is right there, versus the pivot point on the frame, which is our bushings, and the pivot point, the direct drive to our knuckle right there. So that will determine our total travel and our swing, and in this case the ratio is 1.7. And that's where we get into changing out our struts to a different strut or coilover, depends how you want to call it, because the coil is over the shock. So anyway you look at it, it's a coilover. And we have a couple different options in the market, and I know the question comes up is upper control arm, things like that. Something I want to know about upper control arms. As we saw based on the measurement and of the movement that we had, it's not really necessary. We can get away without doing different upper control arm, because the thing you need to keep in mind, when you put in different upper control arm, and I have a knuckle here, what it does, it changes the ball joint angle. So instead of, say, at full extension, your ball joint angle is here and it's maxing out, right, at the full droop, you get the new upper control arm, you'll get about, across all of them, 1 inch of extra down travel. Now if you look, before you assemble it back together, the ball joint still has a lot more room to go downwards. The reason is, you're maxed out on your tie rod and on your lower ball joint. Now if you would push the suspension upwards, then you lose a lot of up travel, because this upper new ball joint at the new angle, now that's maxed out. But these guys can still go further up. Now if you get a uniball control arm, it's a bit of a different conversation. It will have more upwards movement and downwards movement. But that's something I want to note. The upper control arms are not really the 100% answer, because they do limit your up travel. But again, if you're doing bigger wheels, bigger tires, that might not be an issue, assuming you have your bump stops in correct spots. Set up, I'm going to grab my phone here, and we're going to go over what's available in the market, and then what is this whole situation back here. So I have my list and I have the numbers here. So we're going to address basically apples to apples on shock sizing. From 2-inch shock sizes or 2-inch coilover sizes, we have Bilstein 51s, we got Foxes, and we got Ibex. The Bilsteins, they come in at 3.6 inches of stroke, and they'll net us about 6.2 inches of wheel travel. Not that much of an upgrade from Rancho, and from perspective of getting mid-travel suspension, we're not even off-road travel, let's be honest. Next we have Foxes, they're at 4.3. So that's a lot more stroke, and they'll net you 7 inches of travel. So that is the next really good option, and Foxes are rebuildable. Next we got Ibex. Ibex is very interesting. They come at 5.7. That's a lot of travel. Now whether the springs that they come paired with, I don't know if they will support all of it. Depends on the weight of spring and how the setup is, but it is there and that is available. And so they'll average you about 9.6 inches of travel, which is a lot, quite a bit there, and that's actually moving in a proper mid-travel suspension. Next we have 2.5-inch bodies. That's what everybody does, the Durking upgrades, Mozilla, everything else. And well, Bilstein 6112s technically don't really fall in that category. And one thing to note, because there's a 2.6 body, 2.6 piston, is they're only 4 inches of stroke. Not a lot, and then that's you about 6.8 inches of travel. The other options will be Foxes 2.5s, Kings 2.5s, Icon, I think Elka may be another one, Falcon is another brand that's in this market. The only numbers that I was able to find concrete are the Foxes, and they're at 5.3 inches of shock travel, and they'll net you 9 inches of suspension travel. So there you have it. Those are the base things that we have that provided what's on the market. And a lot of them guys recommend run upper control arms to get the extended travel, to utilize more of it, and you will go down further, about an inch. but not upwards. And that's the thing that's kind of left out, but generally everybody goes with the bigger tires. We usually go with 33s, 35s, whatever the case is, and it doesn't come into play in fact, because if you do would bump it up all the way, you would be hitting, you'd be maxing out the ball joint, but it wouldn't matter because the tire would be hitting the fender liner, or the wheel well. All this information there brings us to what I have going on back here. So what I got is a new product. These are universal coilovers from Fox. And these Foxes, including other brands that are available, they're in 2.0 body. This is what I used in my application for simplicity. They are at 6 inches of stroke on the shock. That'll give you 11 inches of wheel travel. So we'll basically be utilizing almost the whole motion from ball joint to ball joint, just enough little bit of safety, of cushion, not to destroy the ball joints that are there, bottom them out, which is not good for them. And to mount these, because they're universal, as you can see here, we have eyelet to eyelet. So this is where the new product comes in, and that is eyelet to eyelet coilover conversion mounts. And this is this whole kit back here. These are extras that I got for my reservoirs, because that's the other thing. I'm running 2.0 body with the remote reservoir, so you don't necessarily have to go to a bigger shock to get this. And that gives more oil, better cooling, a little bit better performance. Now back to the kit itself. So right here we have the upper mounts and we have the lower mounts for the control arms, and this fits any knuckle setup you have. If you have aluminum or cast steel or the stamped steel ones. And this will fit all GMT 900 front suspension design, which is made again from 07 till 18. And this kit, you get all the hardware that you needed to mount your shocks. These are spaced at 1.5 inches, which is what most of these coilovers come with, spacing wise. They all come 1.5 and 1/2 inch bolt through hole for the bolt. One thing I also did is, if we look here, I made them low profile. The reason for that is there is a little bit total extended length discrepancy, so this gives you more variation to play with. So if you have to put a shim here up top or there at the bottom, you have that ability to get whatever spacing you need. But this, because you can make it a little bit longer, the whole package, but you can't make it shorter. So I made these as low profile as possible. And you can also use these to lower your truck as well. That is also on the table, because you can get Vikings as an example. QA1, I believe the other name, that do lowered coilovers. But that aside, this being low profile, for the bottom made it low profile as well. We did not have as much of material surface per se to work with compared to how we got here on the top hat. And as we got this cut out there as well, to make sure there's plenty of clearance for this swinging back and forth. So we added gaskets on both sides to strengthen this. No look it's gonna go anywhere, but that helps spread the load, extra strength. And we have a strap here, so that stays all together as one package, and this is one piece. If you notice, there is no hardware welded in. That way it's easier for you to assemble this in place and while you adjust everything, line everything up. And also, I'm gonna take some of these bolts off. These are all line 10s. If you put these bolts through and then was say tack welded in place, and you would slide that in, solid low control arm, you can't get this through. Because of how low profile I made it, it needs to be that way as well. So right, you would get your bottom bolt through first, only on the bottom mounts, not for the top, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you can just drop this in, and it also locks it in from walking itself out. Not like it would come loose after you put some Loctite on this, or maybe you want to use a locking hardware, but it's there to help it out, to keep it stay in place. And one thing about this kit, it's also made to work with a 4-wheel drive system, and there's a bit of an offset, and that has helped to for the coilover and the spring to clear the axles. And I bought these as an extra, so these are to mount the reservoirs up top. Now let's go over the coilovers. So these are Foxes, as I mentioned, a 2.0 body, 6 inches of stroke, and I had AccuTune Off-Road. They built them for me. They were fantastic to work with. I had a little bit of a hard time finding somebody who would be interested in doing this build. They came through, great place. I have nothing bad to say. And we got the springs here. I used IBAC springs. I used 16-inch long spring, and I already had my preload adjusted. This is actually, if you can see here, these look pretty beat up. They've already been on the truck. They've already been tested. And these mounts I actually updated once. And one thing I want to say, I would have went with a 14-inch spring. it will be easier to deal with versus the 16-inch one. At the spring weight that I use, which is 700, that's what was recommended by IBAC. I'm not really running that much preload, so it wasn't really necessary. So I would say if I would do it next time, I would have done a 14-inch spring. I might have went with a lighter coil as well. Not like this one is too stiff, but maybe I think I want a little bit more bounce. But again, I don't have my winch mounted, so that might make a difference once I have a tray and the winch mounted in there as well. So I'm not gonna worry about it at the moment. Other option we have is you can also, because I was talking about the 2.0s, you can run 2.5-inch body. You will have to mount it differently. I'll show it to you on the suspension, and we'll see in there. As we go through the full range of motion, there is a little gap left on the compression, and that is due to the Fox being 6.5 inches of stroke, not 6. If you want to mount 2.5-inch Fox, right here, as you can see, this is where the issue is the clearance between the axle to the spring. So this is a 2.0 body with 2.5-inch ID spring, and there's room for that, but not for when you'll be using the 2.5-inch body. You'll be using a 3-inch ID spring, so you're not going to have that room, because you can see how close this is, roughly where it's at would be. And I have it currently mounted body downwards. Now with the 14-inch spring, the actual perch seat, instead of being where it's at here for me, it will be up here, and it will be clearing this axle with no issues. So you would have to do body downwards. Now that comes into question what to do with the remote oil reservoir. Now one thing to note, this is the line. It's very flexible. It's made the same way as the brake line is, because it's a hydraulic line, so you can handle all the up and down movement. So you could, I can fish it here, maybe with a longer line, kind of mount it somewhere, let's say kind of like this somewhere. You can get when you have them built with a longer line, or even here, just to be, out the way. Now, if you paid attention in the beginning, you'll notice my wheel package was pretty big. There are 35 overall tall tire, 285, 75, 18. And to use all that suspension travel with this big tire, as I had this whole speech earlier, I implemented a 3.5-inch lift knuckle from Rough Country. The knuckle fit perfectly. It's available for all the GMT 900s, and the machining and the fitment was great. I had no issues. It corrected all the ball joint angles and the tie rod angle, and gave a bit more space for the axle itself. Personally, I got just the knuckle kit. I did not get the differential drop. With that being said, you can get it, and I think it's only a couple bucks extra. Like the whole thing would run you $280. I paid about $230, $240 for the knuckle kit. But that let me run the 35-inch tire. As it's going through the motion, I have no issues. Let's take a look at these goods. Now, since you're stuck all the way to the end, let's talk budget, let's talk cost of all of this. And I said that it's going to be a low cost comparing to the other options, and we need to establish prices of the other options. First, we're going to rule out right away the long travel kits, the 12 inches plus, or maybe even 11 inches plus, because you're going to be doing the control arms. That's going to run you about $4 to $6 grand, depends on what brand, four-wheel drive axles, things like that. But it's not just control arms. You still got to get your coilovers, you still got to do the fenders, you got to do the fender liner, headlight mount. It's a whole build. It's not just the entry price of the long travel suspension, control, and kit. You have a whole list of other things you have to do. Now let's talk the bolt-in coilovers or bolt-in struts, what we have. Depending which ones you go with, you're looking on average for the ones that give you the most travel is going to be $1,000 plus. The Fox's 2.0s, IBACs, going to be at $1 grand. If you go with Fox's 2.5s, Kings 2.5s, etc., you're looking at $1,500, $1,600 and up. To utilize all the travel that's available, you have to do the upper control arm. Control arms, from the quality perspective, they'll run from anywhere from probably about $500 up to $1,000. And now let's talk how much does this kit that I provide, my whole build, how much this ran. First, the coilover conversion mounts. At this time, they're being sold at $250 US dollars. All right, let's talk coilovers. Here where the prices varies greatly, because you can start at lower end. As an example, FOA, they're around $300, $200 per coilover. You can run all the way up to Kings, internal bypass, 2.5, which run about $900, $800. That's not including possible custom tuning that you might want to do. Now, for picking the coilover package that you want to go with, there's definitely options, as I mentioned, and I can make a separate video if there's interest in it, and there'll be a bit of some pictures and explaining how they work. I'm not an expert on them by any means, but I've collected some information, doing my own research, and I can give you a general idea what's the differences, how they work, and some of description that's in there, because there is slight misleading per se information that you do need to be aware of. Packages that I chose were the Foxes 2.0 with the remote reservoirs. Those run at $400 a piece. That is their MSRP. That's what they're sold at. I had AccuTune Off-Road. They built them for me, as mentioned before. Might have a bit of an add-on. We had 90-degree fittings. Looking at it now, I might have gotten away without doing them, or I would have had to maybe get a 45-degree fitting. Would have been a better option. We also changed out the piston to a Performance Series piston, because these are factory race series, and they have stiffer valving. The piston in there itself is a stiffer piston, less oil flow. It's meant for desert, high-speed runs, which is not what I do a lot of here, especially mainly daily. So we changed it out to factory race. So there was some app charges on that end, and they ended up running me $935. Next, the coil springs. The coil springs were $60 a piece, so they're $120 for the coil springs. And this coilover package in total equals to $1,055. Next, we'll be addressing the 35-inch tires that I'm running. And to level it out to 3 inches like I have mine, you would need to do control arms. That's going to be additional cost on the base drop-in, bolt-in coilers that you would get. In my case, I got the lift knuckle, which again, that is an option as well for you to perform with those other ones. And the lift knuckle kit ran about $280. That's with the diff drop and the knuckle itself. So in total, this whole build runs a few bucks shy of $1,600. That's the total investment, and you're exactly at the price point of 2.5-inch body Foxes that travel 5.3. And again, that is not including the upper control arms. And there's your budget mid-travel suspension. 10 inches for $1,600. Not really going to touch that on a four-wheel drive. If you're interested in getting the same type of build as I have, get a bit more information on it, email me at mercubuild@gmail.com. There you have it. I'll see you on the next one.